Sure. Hey, it's Kevin DeWitt here. Welcome to another tip, trick, technique session. In this session, we're going to have a look at how to compress a bass guitar. So in previous videos, I've run through techniques of how to use a compressor. So we'll cover that off slightly here, but we're not going to go into great depth of how to use a compressor as such. We're going to concentrate on more on using it on a bass guitar. Now, how you do this on a bass guitar is going to be dependent on the bass itself and the song. So I'm going to give you some tips of what I believe can be done. But again, it's going to depend on your song and how your bass sounds and what sound you are going for. You know, there's various ways to do it. We can have very transient, very pick clicky or finger clicky bass guitars, or we can have very mellow, very long, drony bass notes that hang on for a long time. So let's get into it and see if we can give you some tips on how to use a compressor on your bass guitar. So let's start off with something here, which you can see basically does a couple of notes and then hangs out. So what's going to be imperative to me at this stage, and again, this is basing it without hearing the rest of the song and what you're going to achieve for, but I generally find with a bass guitar like this, we want to extend this bass here. We want to make sure that we don't have big dips in our bass, and as such, our song starts to sound thin in certain spots. As the bass fades away, we suddenly lose all our bass elements in our song. So we don't really want that to an extent. We want the bass to still sound natural, but we also need to sort of do something along the lines of trying to get that extending note there a bit fatter. All right, so I'm going to pull up a stock plugin from Cubase here, and you can use any compressor you like as long as it gives you the settings that you need here. All right, so we need to determine what we're going to do and how much compression we want to do. So, and that, again, that's all going to depend on your bass, but let's just ramp this up a little bit here. And let's say we go for a 4:1 ratio. Now, the concept of this is we need to make some decisions. Do we want to chop off the transient of the bass, or do we like the sound of that? Like, do we want it smoother without that click at the start of the bass, or do we really want that click note to come through? And that's going to determine our attack setting. Okay, because if we want the click note to come through, then we want to slow the attack down so that it doesn't compress down onto that first part of the note. We want it to let that through. But of course, if we want to smooth out that note and reduce that very heavy transient, if it's jumping out of the mix and it's taking over, then we want to shorten our attack to make sure that we're clamping down on that note. Okay, so let's sort of start with that part and see what we get when we do with the compressor. So let's get our threshold to a point. And sometimes a good technique is to actually over-compress so you can hear what is happening and then start to reduce your settings to settle it down to the right level. So we could go quite extreme so that we get maximum compression. And you can see it's pulling down pretty quickly there. So you hear that first part of the note? It's basically killed it. So if we slow this down a bit, we're still getting a bit of the note. Okay, so let's say we sort of like that. It's letting the start of the note come through. We're happy with that. Now what we want to do next is look at our release. Okay, so our release is basically the time after the compressor kicks in, the time that it takes to let go once the signal falls back below the threshold. So keeping in mind that we are compressing 4:1, so the compressor turns on after that first initial hit, and it stays on for a period of time until the signal goes below the threshold. Once it goes below the threshold, then it starts to release, and it releases based on this time here. But all that time that the compressor is still turned on and the compressor is releasing, it has reduced the volume of the signal. So if we want to get this end part of the note up, we need to make sure that the compressor is turned off at this stage. It needs to have stopped compressing, because compressing means we are reducing the volume. We don't want to be reducing the volume anymore. We want to stop compressing this part here to make it louder. So two factors obviously come into play with that. One is we need to make sure that the threshold is set to a level that it is going below the threshold somewhere up here as opposed to up here. The second factor is the release time. We want the release time to be shorter, because the longer the release is, the longer it's going to take for the compressor to turn off. So if we let's just raise that up a bit. We want to see it release. Now, if we make the release really slow, watch the compressor. It's really slow to move back, and it doesn't go back till very far back into the note. And if we were compressing quite heavily, look how long it is before that compressor has really let go. Okay, it's reducing the amount that it's compressing. So it's not like it's compressing totally the same all the time. It is reducing, but it hasn't fully let go. So it's still compressing quite a bit. Now, as I said, so if we leave it as heavy compression, just as an example, we'll see how slow that is. Sort of see where it is that it stops. It almost goes all the way to the end, to the next note. Okay, now, if we start to slow this down, we speed up the reduction there. Okay, now it's still not going because we've got our threshold set too heavy. So let's reduce our threshold. Okay, let's go a little bit heavier because I want to get... Now, I'm going to exaggerate this a bit. We may go a little bit subtler than this in the actual song, but I'm trying to obviously prove a point here and show you a detailed example of why things are working, because there's no point in me just telling you figures, because they're not going to work on every mix. So we need to sort of explain the concept so that you can apply that to any bass guitar. All right, so if we set it to there, we're releasing fairly quick there. So let's see if we can hear a difference between the slow release and the fast release. So to me, I'm hearing the note ring out a lot more with the fast release, And a slow release, it's a lot lower in volume. So this is sort of the setting I would probably go with a fairly, not most of the time, but with a bass like this. So if we want to get that low note to ring out more, we want to have a not too fast an attack. I mean, again, it depends on the transients here. If we want to get that transient through, then we need to slow it down a little bit. And we want to release fairly quickly. Okay, we want our threshold set to a level that it also drops below the compressor pretty early on in the stages. And the amount of ratio you set is going to depend on how much compression you want. But a 4:1, that's pretty good on a bass. That's not unheard of. It's quite common. Now, if we wanted to level that out even more, then that is where you would start to look at chopping off that transient a bit. And you'll see, you can almost see it there with the meter. So if we just mute, so bypass the plugin, this is what we get. So we get a big sort of couple of notes at the start. So the early hits are there, the transients are there, and it fades out fairly quickly. So it drops off very quickly right there. Now if we so there you can hear we've sort of chopped off these peaks a little bit. We've flattened that out, and you can hear we've extended the note quite a bit there. So to prove the point of this, I'm going to render this with the channel settings. So now what we're comparing is these two tracks here. So this, we bring this up here. This is the rendered bass of this, okay, through the compressor. So if you compare the waveforms, you can see there, we have reduced the peaks, and you can see how thick the note is and how much more thicker it is along the path compared to this one here. So it thins out quite a lot. So that is what we've just done with the compressor. We've controlled the front end a little bit. We've still got a bit of a transient. Again, depends on your music, but we've made that back end a lot thicker. Okay, and we've done that, as I said, by having a 4:1 ratio, fairly fast attack. How fast depends on how much of that transient you want to get rid of, and a very fast release. So that's with a bass that has low, slow notes. All right, so with this bass guitar, it's very clicky on the transient of the note. And that might be sort of getting in the way of the other instrumentation. You want to control it a little bit, control those peaks, and get a little bit more solid and a little bit more to the background there. So again, let's sort of go to our 4:1 ratio here. Now, to control those initial peaks, those very clicks there at the start, we need to have a very fast attack because we need it to compress pretty quickly. And again, with the release, that's going to sort of depend. You want to sort of do your timing around the note values. So let's just have a bit of a play and see what settings come up with this one. So you can see there we're really pumping this compressor in at the moment with these settings, and that's with a fast attack and a fast release. So we're grabbing those peaks and we're letting go very quickly, so the compressor's really sort of pumping with the bass. So you can hear it really pulling down those notes at the start. So let's do the same thing again so we can have a visual indication of what that's doing. So you can see there how flat that line is now. So a lot of those peaks have been reduced quite heavily. And again, as I'm saying, these are slightly exaggerated, so you may not want to go that far, but look how rock solid that line is there compared to this, which has this dynamics here. But as I said, it depends on the style of the song and what you're going for. This dynamics may be exactly what you want in your mix, because you want that bass to be clicking out there and you want that bass to be driving the rhythm. Whereas here, we've sort of flattened that out and we've blended it more into the background and reduced that that clicky rhythm that's going to be happening. So there you go. That is my tips on how to use a compressor on bass guitar. Hopefully you've picked up some valuable information from this, and hopefully it is going to help you improve the sound of your bass guitar in your next mix. But again, these are guides, they are not rules. So it is all going to depend on the sound of your bass guitar and the sound that you are going for your song. So hopefully this has been helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.